Good morning and welcome to the Miramar National Cemetery Support Foundation Memorial Day ceremony. We celebrate this day each year to honor the men and women of our military who have given all in the service of our nation. It is a day to reflect on their service and the price they were willing to pay to preserve our freedoms. This tribute for the nation's fallen service members dates to just after the Civil War. This day of remembrance and respect for our nation's fallen has continued for over 150 years. As we will hear from today's speakers, these are themes that continue to this day. This Memorial Day, we are grateful to be hosted by the USS Midway Museum on this, the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Midway, from which this ship takes its name. The battle has often been called the turning point of the war in the Pacific. It was the Allies' first major naval victory against Axis forces and allowed the United States to switch the strategic initiative to an offensive footing. It was not without cost, and 307 American servicemen lost their lives in the battle. The USS Midway was commissioned a week after the end of World War II and was the largest ship in the world until 1955. She served for an unprecedented 47 years and saw action in the Vietnam War and Operation Desert Storm. As we stand here today on this deck where our predecessors once stood, it ties us back to World War II and her namesake battle. And similarly, those who built and first served on her were reminded of battles and conflicts that came before and the service members who bore any cost. And so, though this 150-year Memorial Day tradition may seem long and its meaning at times obscure, when we look at our place and where we stand, we can draw a direct line to those who came before and those who continue to serve our nation in peace and war. Chaplain Paul Ward, a Midway volunteer, will now give our invocation. Chaplain Ward spent 30 years in the pastoral ministry and has served as a chaplain with the Civil Air Patrol, U.S. Air Force Auxiliary. Please welcome to the podium, Chaplain Ward.
I would invite you to join me in prayer according to the practices of your faith as I pray in mine. Let us pray. Eternal God, we gather on this Memorial Day to pay tribute to those men and women who have made the supreme sacrifice of life itself for the preservation of the freedom of this beloved nation. Here aboard the flight deck of the USS Midway, we remember the service and sacrifice of those young men who fought for this nation's freedom in a battle for which this aircraft carrier was named, the Battle of Midway. Regarding these valiant warriors who fought at this significant battle in the early days of June 1942, these words were written. They had no right to win, yet they did. And in doing so, they changed the course of a war. Even against the greatest of odds, there is something in the human spirit, a magic blend of skill, faith, and valor that can lift men from certain defeat to incredible victory. It is that spirit, that magic blend of skill, faith, and valor, which we honor and remember today as we recall with gratitude the soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen who have lost their lives in the defense of America. When our nation has been drawn into war, even against the greatest of odds, our youth have given themselves to secure peace and freedom for this nation. And we owe those who have fallen a debt which we can never repay. Let us rededicate our lives to the ideals for which they paid the supreme price. Their legacy is our birthright and responsibility. Help us to perform the mission placed in our hands, that generations yet unborn will continue to enjoy the freedoms which we hold dear. Grant us skill, faith, and valor for the daily task of preserving freedom. Amen.
It is my honor to introduce Greta Hamilton, the director of the Fort Rosecrans and Miramar National Cemeteries. Ms. Hamilton has worked for the Veterans Administration for over 10 years, holding posts as assistant director and director at national cemeteries in Lake Worth, Riverside, Marion, and Omaha. Prior to joining the Veterans Administration, she served in the U.S. Air Force, retiring as a major after a 20-year career. Ms. Hamilton holds a Bachelor of Science from East Carolina University and master's degrees from Oklahoma University and Washington University. Please welcome to the podium Director Greta Hamilton.
Thank you, Richard. Today we gather to reflect on and honor those who lost their lives in combat, the ultimate sacrifice for a grateful nation. President Abraham Lincoln urged his fellow Americans more than 150 years ago as he spoke these words at the dedication of the Gettysburg National Cemetery, words that still resonate today. That it is the obligation of the living to remember those killed in action. That from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to the cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. That this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from this earth. Today we reflect not only on those who lost their lives in the battlefields in defense of this nation, but also the families they left behind. These fallen service members had mothers and fathers, grandparents, and other loved ones. Many left behind wives or husbands and children. Some died before meeting their children. Sadly, others died before they even had an opportunity to start a family. On this day, in addition to the men and women who served and sacrificed for this country through the generations, I would like to offer a special acknowledgement on the 80th anniversary of the Battle of the Midway to those soldiers, sailors, and airmen who gave their all in the most decisive battle in history. My staff and I are eternally grateful for the sacred trust that you have placed in our hands to care for those who have borne the battle. Thank you.
Thank you, Greta. Today it's truly my honor to introduce our next speaker and my dear friend, Mr. Tony Teravainen, the San Diego Veteran of the Year in 2021, as well as the CEO and co-founder of Support the Enlisted Project, also known as STEP. Being the son of a career Air Force father and a U.S. Navy submariner himself, Tony knows firsthand the many hardships military families endure. Since 2014, Tony has overseen the positioning of STEP as a successful, trusted, and viable partner to our young military families and transitioning veterans throughout Southern California and now in Washington State. A believer in strong community, Tony additionally offers his time to support the many agencies that provide the strong blanket of support for our military. His awards and honors include being a TEDx speaker, a top 500 most influential persons, as well as being named the 2021 Nonprofit Executive of the Year. Tony holds undergraduate degrees in business management and nuclear engineering and a master's degree in executive leadership from the University of San Diego. He holds licenses in Six Sigma, project and change management, holds 1 U.S. patent, and is currently pursuing his PhD in public policy. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend, Tony Teravainen.
What does Memorial Day mean to me? Picnics and barbecues? Kind of. But I think more about those pictures of a family in a national cemetery picnicking at the headstone of a fallen service member. They are mourning, and we all should mourn these losses. But we should also celebrate for these souls, celebrating those who made the ultimate sacrifice in defense of our nation's colors, those who have died while in military service. These lost souls need to be remembered because without them, this great experiment in democracy that we call the United States of America would never have been created nor maintained. My dad served in the United States Air Force for 20 years, so I grew up on these giant Air Force bases all around the world where we're constantly surrounded by other military families and culture. In the 1970s as a kid, I remember Memorial Day picnics and barbecues, and we usually spent them with other military families. A bunch of families from a given unit or squadron would get together and play games, eat, and I'm sure the adults would memorialize in their own way. And it must have been a tough time for them as Vietnam was still raging, where eventually 58,000 service members died. I wondered how they coped with it, seeing all that death and destruction, knowing it could have just as easily been one of them that died in the many seemingly random explosions or attacks that occurred when they were all taking their turns serving in Southeast Asia. 10 years later, I joined the Navy as a submariner, and I carried those same questions with me as I went to sea for the first time. As we took her down, all the experienced sailors just went about their work. But I was amazed at how the boat was creaking, moaning, and literally getting smaller as the tons and tons of water pressure was trying to crush her and get inside. So I asked somebody, I said, what if we get a leak and start flooding? And he told me that we try to fix it and get to the surface, but if we can't, then we all get crushed like a tin can and end up on the ocean floor. And for some reason, this made a lot of sense to me. All who serve in the military sacrifice in their own way. They have their own risks, and they have to come to terms with the inherent dangers. And you have to understand that despite your best efforts to make it home alive, if your time is up, if your ticket gets punched, if your number gets drawn, then so be it. So what is Memorial Day to me? It's giving a nod, a salute, an acknowledgement to those who did end up on their version of the ocean floor. To me, it's not necessarily just their service that we honor, but it's the fact that they gave their last measure in service to something greater than themselves. And that needs to be memorialized. They were willing to do the job, knowing the risks, but also knowing that the reward was greater. And for the past 10 years, I've been growing a nonprofit that serves military and veteran families. And at some point, I also began engaging in other places around my community where I could serve veterans. And through all these activities, I've been honored to attend many Memorial Day activities and celebrations across town. But afterwards, after those events, I always try to go to Liberty Station. I go to the Submarine Veterans of World War II Memorial, and there sit 52 black granite monuments, one for each submarine lost during World War II. And etched on each stone is a story about the boat, how she was lost, and the names of all the submariners that went down with her. 3,500 submariners. 1/3 of the submarine fleet was lost during World War II, but that same submarine fleet sank 50% of the enemy tonnage during the war. Their role was vital for our victory, and they knew it. The life expectancy of a submariner then was 5 war patrols. Some years ago, I had the honor of meeting a guy who did 11 war patrols, and I asked him how he kept going out. And he said he was just doing his job, and the thought never crossed his mind. But as he was saying this, I could see him scrolling through the faces he remembered of those who never came home and went to the ocean floor. Memorial Day is not just about wartime losses, it's about honoring those who lost their lives in service. The military is the 3rd most deadly occupation in the United States, and over the past 30 years, more service members have died during work-related accidents than any other cause. Training to defend this nation is filled with sacrifices and risks as well. Memorial Day to me is about honoring their courage to do their jobs day after day, night after night, to secure the freedoms, knowing that there is a very real possibility that this could be their last act. And that blank check that we all wrote to our nation for our lives could be cashed in at any time. It's about honoring those who gave it all, as Teddy Roosevelt so eloquently said of those in the arena, while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. It is these souls I remember on Memorial Day, their sacrifices, their willingness to sacrifice, and how they have literally created and have sustained the United States of America.
Thank you, Tony. I'm especially honored to introduce our guest speaker, Rear Admiral John Mack McLaughlin, U.S. Navy retired, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the USS Midway Museum. Mack is a 1972 graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and earned his wings in June of 1975. During his 30-year career as a naval aviator, he served as commanding officer of a helicopter squadron and a naval air station. He served 2 tours of duty in the Pentagon and the Chief of Naval Operations Staff, and served flag tours as Commander, Naval Air Reserve Force and Naval Reserve Forces Command. Mack is the former president of the Historic Naval Ships Association and the former chair of the Naval Helicopter Association. He is a board member for the San Diego Port Tenants Association and a member of the American Association of Museums and the California Association of Museums. In 2003, Mack became the president and CEO of the USS Midway Museum 1 month prior to the ship's arrival in San Diego. Since that time, he has overseen the building and expansion of the Midway Museum and its elevation as a centerpiece of the San Diego waterfront. Ladies and gentlemen, Rear Admiral Mac McLaughlin.
Greetings to the flight deck of the USS Midway, America's living symbol of freedom. I'm Mac McLaughlin. I'm the President and CEO, retired Rear Admiral from the Navy, and I'm so honored to be asked to speak to the group that takes care of those great veterans who have passed along. In fact, I have to share with you that my parents, both of them, now reside permanently at Miramar National Cemetery. So thank you to the leadership of both Rosecrans and the cemetery at Miramar. You do a wonderful tribute to our country and to our veterans. It's very appropriate to be here on the flight deck of the USS Midway as we approach the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Midway, probably the most significant battle ever fought by the United States Navy. And if you haven't visited the USS Midway yet, I hope you'll come downtown San Diego and really get yourself immersed in the history and the story of these great Americans that changed the tide of the entire war. You really have to go back in history to a little bit before the Battle of Midway to understand the significance of what we accomplished in June of 1942. For 6 months earlier, on December 7th, 1941, we were attacked at Pearl Harbor, and our entire fleet of major capital ships was destroyed. Our battleship force that was central to the way the Navy fought wars at sea in those days was destroyed. Now, luckily, the aircraft carriers happened to be out at sea on maneuvers, so despite the fact that the Japanese had planned on crippling the aircraft carriers as well, they were not able to do that, and we still had 3 old Essex-class aircraft carriers in the inventory to employ as we moved towards defending ourselves. The problem was that Japan had 8 aircraft carriers, 6 of them battle-tested at Pearl Harbor, and all of them having been fighting and conquering China, the Indonesian islands, and moving down towards Australia to spread out their kingdom. And here we had not only 3 aircraft carriers, but a group of totally untrained people. For if you go back in history and remember, America was trying to stay out of that war. But once we got attacked, we had no choice. And so even though we weren't prepared to go against this dominant Japanese force that had been honed in battle for the previous 6 years, somehow these young Americans strapped on to their aircraft carriers, got some intelligence that the Japanese force was going to be attacking the Midway Islands, and surprised them on June 4th, 1942. Totally overwhelmed in numbers, totally overwhelmed in quality of pilots. Somehow, miraculously, those 3 aircraft carriers emerged from that battle victorious and sunk 4 of the Japanese carrier. And for the first time in the previous 10 years, Japan's military suddenly found themselves on the defensive instead of on the offensive, moving out to attack foreign lands. The war was beginning to take a turn, and it's to those young Americans that overcame insurmountable odds to ensure our victory that as we approach Memorial Day, we celebrate. But it's not just about the Battle of Midway, even though we are enjoying celebrating our 80th birthday coming up. It is really about the history of America, and a country that was founded from the very first, based on one simple principle and one principle alone, and that is we want to enjoy the autonomy that every nation should enjoy, a country that is allowed to govern itself not from a king or a czar or a prime minister or an emperor, but govern itself through elected people that have been put forward by the citizens of that country. Democracy was a new concept, but we made the decision late in the 18th century that that's why we were starting the United States of America. And if our freedoms were ever going to be threatened, we would fight. Now, if you think the young rebels back in the late 18th century had any more right to win that battle against the strongest country in the world, in the history of the world, England, you can see there's a thread of DNA that goes through those young, brave women that continue to serve our nation, put their lives on the line in defense of the liberties that many of us take for granted. So as we come up on our 80th anniversary of Midway and the turning point of World War II, what we're really celebrating is not a battle. What we're really celebrating is the spirit of those veterans throughout our history who have always been willing to go forth and fight to defend the freedoms of the vast majority of Americans who don't move forward at that time. We owe them a great debt of gratitude, and I hope on Memorial Day that you can all take some time to think about the history of this great country and be thankful that we have courageous veterans throughout that history to be able to do our nation's bidding when required by our government leaders. And with that, I will just say thank you for joining us here on the Midway. Please come and see us, and God bless you, and enjoy a very thoughtful and significant Memorial Day weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us for our event on this Memorial Day. And thank you to our speakers today for their thoughtful words and for reminding us of the significance of this day. Prior to the end of the Civil War, President Lincoln famously asked his fellow citizens to care for him who shall have borne the battle and for his widow and his orphan. There are not words enough to thank these brave warriors for the precious gift they have given us. And so, though this commemoration takes place just once a year, let us strive to remember and honor these heroes every day, because in remembering the fallen, we also honor their loved ones. Thank you.